Speaker will be Ben Poole. Ben teaches history at Texas Tech University and has a PhD in history from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. His research is focused on popular culture in late 20th century France, ranging from youth culture in rock music to his current research, which explores how food helps construct identities in France in the global age. He's working on a book project based on his doctoral dissertation, French Taste, Food and National Identity in Post-Colonial France. And his talk today will be called The Politics of the Grain, Couscous in Post-Colonial France.
On April 21st, 2002, Jean-Marie Le Pen, the far-right Front National Party, shocked the world by taking second place in the first round of the French presidential elections, ahead of the socialist Prime Minister Lionel Jospin. Le Pen advanced to the second round against the conservative incumbent Jacques Chirac. Faced with the threat of Le Pen's xenophobia that was seen as a challenge to French Republican principles, the French left actually rallied support for their longtime adversary, Chirac. To this end, on April 26th, the Socialist Party-aligned organization SOS Racisme held an anti-Front National rally billed as a couscous républicain, a Republican couscous dinner. Couscous, a quintessentially North African dish, was well known to rank highly among France's most popular national dishes, in polls, such as this one. SOS Racisme's message with this event was clear. Only a truly intolerant reactionary like Le Pen would refuse such a hearty and delicious addition to French culture. Couscous represented an inclusive French national identity, and thus was the perfect symbol to galvanize France's Republican consensus in repudiation of Le Pen's xenophobia. Indeed, on May 5th, Chirac won more than 80% of the vote. And yet, paradoxically, what made embracing couscous as French such a meaningful show of Republican openness was precisely the fact that the dish was widely recognized as foreign and exotic and associated with France's largest and most controversial immigrant community. This paper will explore this duality of couscous, being both familiar and yet exotic, examining several very different uses of couscous as a political symbol in post-colonial France. I argue that the tension between the dish's Frenchness and its foreignness gives couscous a powerful ambivalence that lends itself equally to building consensus and to voicing divisive views. It can be either inclusive or exclusionary, and oftentimes both at once. For instance, the president of SOS Racisme during the 2002 election was Malek Bouti, himself a child of Algerian immigrants. And he once said, "If we start speaking Arabic or Mandingo, Breton or Corsican, we will destroy the national community. France is baguettes, wine, cheese, and now couscous, plus liberty, equality, and fraternity. 200 years ago, we created a political national identity, not an ethnic one." But despite this well-worn Republican claim to a purely political nation, even in this very statement, Bouti cannot avoid drawing cultural distinctions. He uses the inclusion of couscous as French as a token of multicultural goodwill, so that he can turn around and exclude speaking Arabic or Mandingo. Again, what makes calling couscous French politically significant here is its obvious foreignness and difference from baguettes, wine, and cheese. But looking beyond such overt political rhetoric, we can see a similar ambivalence in representations of couscous in everyday French popular culture. Even as couscous became a familiar, even banal presence in French homes, supermarkets, and cafeterias, its appeal often rested on its foreignness. Ironically, an exotic image was even exploited to advertise couscous in its most quintessentially modern westernized form.
Et maintenant, avec Brittany, partons au pays du couscous. Mais il n'est pas si facile de découvrir un pays et tous ses secrets. Et pourtant, Couscous Brittany, tout y est. Couscous Brittany, le voyage est aussi dans la boîte.
So over this stereotypical North African Medina scene, complete with children riding donkeys, the voiceover announcer is saying, it's not easy to get to know a country and its secrets, but with Buitoni Couscous, it's all there. Buitoni Couscous, the voyage is in the can. The implication here is that the authentic and essential elements of North African culture are traditional, local, and remain unadulterated by modernity. And yet, they can be discovered just by opening the can. As absurd as this may sound, it worked because it reinforced an exotic image of the Maghreb that excited French consumers. Moreover, it confirmed dominant historical narratives that keep French and North African cultures fundamentally separate and discount the impact of the long and intimate colonial and migratory relationships entwining France and North Africa. For France, this separation has been crucial both in expunging imperialism from the record of the Republic and in recasting former colonial subjects as simply foreign immigrants, thus providing a new rationale for continuing to withhold or even rescinding long-promised French citizenship. But narratives affirming the cultural separation of France and the Maghreb and discrediting colonial culture have also been fundamental to the national identities of the post-colonial nation states of Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia. Thus, we can also witness an image of couscous as traditional, indigenous, and purely North African in cookbooks written by North African authors. In Les Aventures du Couscous, Hadjira Mouhoub and Claudine Rabat write, "In the beginning there was the steppe, and upon these fertile highlands the soul of the Maghreb took shape. North African cuisine has stayed true to this original identity as it has passed unobstructed for millennia from one generation of mothers to the next. It speaks to us of durum wheat crushed into dry, tough semolina that is then transformed into dreamily light couscous by a ballet of hands that are at once patient and agile. This cuisine roots daily gestures in ancestral rituals that call upon the earth, water, fire, and air to achieve its alchemy." Other cookbooks are more forthcoming about the history of trade, migrations, and conquest that have influenced North African cuisine. For example, in the 1983 cookbook La Cuisine d'Algérie, Salima Hadja wrote, "Situated at the crossroads of civilizations, since the most ancient of times, Algerian cuisine bears traces of all the different people who have passed through, Phoenicians, Romans, Arabs, Ottomans, as well as the close relations with neighboring countries in Southern Europe, the Middle East, and Sub-Saharan Africa. It was able to soak up these influences without losing any of its originality or authenticity. It marvelously unites the simplicity of Berber cuisine, still found today among the mountain-dwelling and rural populations, with the refinement of the Romans, the aromas of the Orient, and the good taste of Andalusia." But while acknowledging all these influences going back to the Phoenicians nearly 3,000 years ago, the most recent and probably most consequential influence, the French one, is conspicuously absent here. So acute is the contemporary distaste for any whiff of colonialism, at least among the French readers of North African cookbooks, that the well-known chef and restaurateur Fatima Hall, in her Moroccan cookbook, could confidently ridicule a French scholar for claiming that couscous had originated in Auvergne, knowing her French readers would share her incredulity. To be sure, most scholars agree that the tradition of couscous making did originate in North Africa, and wariness of anyone claiming otherwise is warranted, considering the past history of colonialists, such as the writer Louis Bertrand, alleging European origins of couscous in order to justify the presence of European settlers in Algeria. But what most scholars and cookbook writers alike have generally ignored is the fact that whatever the origins of traditional hand-rolled couscous, the industrially produced couscous that almost everyone in North Africa eats today actually was developed in colonial Algeria by European-owned companies like Ferrero and Ricci. So at one time, this might have been held up as an achievement of the colonial Algerian melting pot that fused Western modernization with local and Mediterranean cultural traditions. But in the post-colonial era that glorifies local traditions and terroirs and disavows colonialism, few are interested in celebrating the history of industrial foods, let alone the successful products of colonial Algeria. So contemporary cookbooks frequently revel in detailing the many laborious steps in making couscous by hand, before almost sheepishly suggesting the reader use industrially produced dry couscous. So taken together, these cookbooks, advertisements, politicians, despite having varied or opposing interests on both sides of the Mediterranean, have all contributed to a dominant myth of couscous as simply an exotic, foreign delicacy that arrived in France just recently with the equally foreign North African immigrants. Thus forgetting that, until quite recently, the largest country in North Africa had been officially part of France, and its inhabitants had been promised and then briefly granted French citizenship. Yet, not everyone welcomed this collective amnesia about the colonial past. On a New Year's Eve television special in 1984, the pop singer Enrico Macias stated that his wish for the new year was that couscous would be added to the great canon of French cuisine, citing a recent poll naming couscous as the second most popular dish in France. As we have seen, references to such polls and calls for recognizing couscous as a French national dish have become something of a trope of Republican inclusiveness. But Macias' statement had more specific and controversial implications. Macias is an Algerian Jew and an outspoken member of the former population of French citizens in Algeria called Pieds Noirs. He has frequently used references to food, especially couscous, in his music and public remarks to plead for recognition of Pieds Noir identity and the culture of colonial Algeria. In his 1969 preface to Le Livre de la Cuisine Pieds Noirs, he wrote, "We lost everything when we left our country. The one thing we have left is the memory that lives on in our hearts. Nothing keeps this memory closer than our cuisine. Pieds Noir cuisine is not an ensemble of specialties. It is the indispensable fertile ground that nourishes the roots of a whole people." So when he demanded the recognition of couscous as part of French cuisine on New Year's Eve 1984, he was not calling for the acceptance of a new immigrant dish, but for the cuisine of colonial Algeria to be recognized as legitimately French. Yet, since 1962, as Macias has been frequently at pains to point out, few wish to recall ever believing the claim, "L'Algérie, c'est la France." Macias has dedicated much of his 50-year career to reminding the French about the France of his childhood, to quote the title of his famous song, La France, mon enfance. Couscous was also at the heart of the remarkable story of another Algerian-born immigrant to France named Guédou, who originated the Parisian phenomenon of restaurants offering free couscous once a week as both an act of charity and a clever business strategy. Guédou is a member of the Berber-speaking Kabyle people of Algeria. In his memoir, he was careful to credit the generosity and hospitality of his free couscous specifically to his Kabyle heritage, rather than Algerian or Islamic culture. Indeed, he often criticized the Arabs who have dominated Algeria since independence and have at times repressed the Kabyle language and culture. Conversely, he frequently expressed his love of France and Western modernity, and even more cautiously mentioned certain achievements of French colonial Algeria, which had at times shown favoritism to the Kabyle people. He also highlighted his clashes with long-bearded Islamic fundamentalist immigrants in France who wanted to teach his children Arabic. He told them that he had come to France so that his children would learn French, and perhaps they should do the same. Thus, Guédou echoed and modeled the Republican immigration policy of integration, which welcomes benign contributions like couscous while shunning foreign languages and religious orthodoxy. But he also expressed a little of Macias's colonial nostalgia. So, as we've seen, couscous can express contentious points of view and unite strange bedfellows. Yet nearly everyone can agree that couscous is good, and it should be welcomed and enjoyed widely in France, albeit for different reasons. This is what made couscous a useful political symbol against Le Pen in 2002. Each person could interpret couscous républicain as emblematic of their own difference from Le Pen, without necessarily defining their views on immigration, colonialism, or multiculturalism. However, for that same reason, another couscous républicain, posted during the 2007 election, was probably less effective in distinguishing Ségolène Royal from a fellow Republican, Nicolas Sarkozy. After all, whatever his controversial actions on immigration may be, Sarkozy has nonetheless been spotted at Enrico Macias's favorite couscous joint in Paris. Ultimately, the same ambivalence that makes couscous useful, thus also limits it. Indeed, the César-winning film, The Secret of the Grain, or in French, La Graine et le Blé, released later in 2007, provides an instructive counterpoint to Guédou's immigrant tale of success and integration through couscous. Like Guédou, the protagonist, Slimane, is a North African immigrant worker who tries to finally make it in France by opening a couscous restaurant. Yet he encounters only indifference from the French locals. On opening night, when the couscous is delayed, the only thing that can satisfy the impatient French diners is substituting one exotic treat for another, as Slimane's stepdaughter must perform an erotic belly dance. This scene illustrates perfectly the trap of Republican integration. The same paradox by which couscous's very foreignness can make it a symbol of Republican national identity also means that in order for immigrants to be integrated into French society, they must first accept the premise that they are foreign and essentially different. Okay. And as a concluding thought, I'd like to note that the title of this paper, The Politics of the Grain, is a double reference to the film The Secret of the Grain and also to Joan Scott's book The Politics of the Veil, about the French headscarf controversies. The widespread popularity of couscous in France has often been touted as a success of integration, a kind of counterexample to the divisive headscarf fiascos. However, as we have seen, couscous's acceptance as a new French national dish reveals many of the same paradoxes, contradictions, and inequities as the rejection of headscarves. So in the cultural politics of post-colonial France, there are no easy solutions. Some are just easier to digest.